The arrows hit him before he even saw the children. 3 of them. Short, thin shafts carved from something dark and resinous, buried in his left shoulder and forearm, the barbs angled inward so pulling them out would tear more than the entry did. Corporal Dale Hurst had been in enough bad situations to know the difference between a flesh wound and something that was going to end him. This was the second kind. He had 40 seconds, maybe less, before whatever coated those tips got into his bloodstream deep enough to matter. He used them to push the child behind a collapsed wall. The settlement on Vora 4 had been burning for 6 hours before the 14th Rapid Deployment Unit made Planet Fall. The mission brief called it a humanitarian stabilization operation, which was military language for, "We are not sure what is happening, but people are dying and someone has to go." The Vorali were a mid-tier civilization by galactic standards, bipedal and warm-blooded, with 4-fingered hands and eyes the deep amber color of old whiskey. They had managed faster-than-light travel for about 40 years, which was enough to make them a protected species under the Galactic Compact, but not enough to make them powerful. Raiders from the outer systems had learned that unprotected settlements were easy targets. The 14th had been dispatched to change that math. What the brief had not mentioned was the weapon caches the raiders left behind. Too automated, pressure-triggered, and programmed to fire at anything above a certain height threshold. Dale was 6'2". The girl was not even close to the trigger threshold. He understood this in the half-second before the mechanism clicked, and he stepped between it and her without deciding to. The body does certain things before the brain votes. His had always done this. His sergeant back at Fort Carson had called it a liability. Dale had never figured out how to argue with that. The child made a sound. It was high and sharp, and he recognized it, even across species, as the sound of a small creature witnessing something terrible. She had amber eyes, huge and wet, fixed on the shafts in his arm. She was maybe 5 years old in human terms, though Vorali aged differently. She wore a strip of fabric around her head, braided tight, the color of dried grass. Dale got down on one knee so he was at her level. "Hey," he said. His voice came out steady, which surprised him. "Do you understand basic?" She stared. "Okay. No basic." He pointed toward the far end of the alley, where 2 Vorali adults were crouched behind a market stall. "Go. Go there. Fast." She did not move. The burning in his shoulder had started. A deep, spreading heat that moved the way infection moved. Not like fire, but like the idea of fire, radiating outward from the shafts in slow, deliberate pulses. Dale had been briefed on Vorali defense weapons. The arrows were called Drovath rounds. They were not designed to kill quickly. They were designed to incapacitate and then let the body's own systems finish the work over several hours. He had maybe 4 hours of useful consciousness. Less if he exerted himself. The military medics carried a partial counteragent, but the partial counteragent only worked in the first 30 minutes. His medic, Corporal Pete Navarro, was on the other side of the settlement with half the squad. Dale reached into his vest pocket and took out a small wrapped piece of compressed ration bar. He held it out to the girl. She looked at it, looked at him. "Go," he said, and tipped his head toward the adults. She took the ration bar. She went. Dale spent the next 3 hours getting his squad out of the settlement. He did not tell anyone about the arrows. He pulled them out himself behind a crumbling doorframe, which was as bad as expected. Maxon packed the wounds with his own field dressing. And then he went back to work. The raiders had left 6 secondary caches. His unit cleared 5 of them before Pete found him sitting against a wall with the kind of stillness that was not rest. "Dale." Pete dropped to his knees. Dale, how long? 3 hours, give or take. Pete did not waste time being angry. He cracked the counter agent, looked at the clock on his wrist display, and shook his head once. And the way a man shakes his head when math gives him an answer he did not want. Partial application, Pete said. It is not going to clear it, it is going to slow it down. How much? Pete calculated. It might put you in suspension instead of killing you, if the dose hits the right window. Might. Dale thought about that. The heat in his arm had reached his chest. It felt like standing too close to an engine that was running too hot. Do it, he said. Pete did. And what came next was not darkness exactly. It was more like a door closing from the inside. Dale felt his body go heavy, and then heavier, and then absent. And the last thing he heard was the sound of someone running. Small feet on broken stone, and a high, sharp cry in a language he did not speak. He did not know that the child had come back. He did not know that she stood over him for the 20 minutes it took the medevac team to arrive. He did not know that she held his hand the entire time, her 4 small fingers wrapped around 2 of his, and that she did not let go until they physically lifted him onto the transport. He did not know any of this. He was already gone. The suspension unit logged him at 14:07 local time. His file was flagged for long-term stasis pending viable treatment. The counter-agent had done exactly what Pete predicted. Bought him a door instead of a wall. The Drovath toxin was fully metabolized into his system, woven into his cellular structure with a complexity that the 14th Field medics could not address with available technology. The Fleet Medical Board reviewed his case on the transit back to the station. Their recommendation was 3 words: wait for better. Dale Hurst was 29 years old when they put him under. The suspension unit was clean and quiet and maintained a temperature of -4 degrees. And inside it, Dale did not dream, did not think. He did not feel the burning that had moved from his shoulder to his chest to something deeper. And he did not know that the galaxy kept moving without him. He did not know that the girl with the grass-colored braid grew up. He did not know what she became. The unit hummed. The years passed. On the morning that the medical notification finally came through, 52 years, 4 months, and 11 days after Dale Hurst had stepped between a weapon and a child, a technician named Carol Briggs looked at the readout, double-checked the date, and quietly called her supervisor. The treatment existed now. They could bring him back. Carol pulled up his file. Read it start to finish, sat for a long moment looking at the suspension pod in Bay 7. She had been doing this job for 9 years and had brought back 11 people from long-term stasis. She had never seen a case flagged the way this one was. There were 17 separate notification requests attached to his file, stacked and time-stamped, the oldest dating back 48 years. Every single one was from the same source, the Virali Royal Communications Office. Carol read that line twice. She picked up her comm and made the call she was authorized to make. And within 4 hours, the room outside Bay 7 had security personnel in it that had not been there before. And the people running those security personnel were very careful not to tell Carol anything specific. And Carol was experienced enough to know that when people are that careful about what they are not telling you, the thing they are not telling you is very large. She went back to Bay 7 and looked at Dale Hurst through the glass. 29 years old. Frozen mid-breath. "Hey," she said. Not really to him. Just to the room. You're going to have some things to catch up on. She began the warm-up sequence. Outside, on the landing pad, a ship was arriving. It was not a human ship. The warm-up sequence for long-term suspension took 14 hours when done safely, and Carol ran it by the book because she had learned the hard way that people who cut corners on suspension recovery ended up writing reports for the rest of their careers. Every system had to come back online in order. The body did not like being alive again, and it needed to be convinced slowly. She checked his vitals every 40 minutes. By hour 6, his heart rate was a low and sluggish 20 beats per minute, working its way toward normal. By hour 10, his eyes had begun rapid movement beneath their lids. Dreaming, or something that looked like it. By hour 12, the external team that had arrived on the non-human ship had made 3 separate inquiries about the timeline, all of them polite, and all of them with an edge that Carol recognized as the politeness of people who were accustomed to being obeyed and were making a significant effort not to say so. She gave them the same answer each time. 14 hours. By the book. By hour 14, Dale Hurst opened his eyes. The first thing he said was Pete's name. It came out cracked and dry, the way voices always came out of suspension. And Carol was ready with the hydration line and the gentle explanation that takes longer to give than it sounds. Pete Navarro had retired 23 years ago. He was 71 now, living in New Mexico with his daughter's family, and Carol had actually spoken to him that morning because he was on the secondary notification list. "He knows you are awake," she told Dale. "He sends his words." Dale processed this. She watched him process it, and it was always the same. The eyes moving over the ceiling, counting years, arriving at a number the brain did not want. 52, she said, saving him the math. He was quiet for a long time. His vitals were good. His muscle response was typical for suspension recovery, which meant weak and uncoordinated for now. His neurological readings were clean. The treatment had worked. The Drovath toxin was gone, fully cleared in the warm-up process, and the cellular damage repaired at a level that had not been possible 52 years ago and was now a standard outpatient procedure. Dale turned his head and looked at her. "Why is there security outside my room?" he said. It was not really a question. His voice was already steadier. "There are some people who wanted to be notified when you woke up." "Military?" "Not exactly." He waited. Carol had been trying to figure out how to say the next part for the last 4 hours. She had not found a better way than straight. "The Virali have a queen now," she said. "They transitioned from a council government to a monarchy about 30 years ago during the Consolidation Wars. The queen's name is Sova. She is the 3rd-ranked political figure in the Outer Galactic Compact." Carol paused. "She has had a standing request filed with Fleet Medical for 48 years, requesting immediate notification if your status changed." Dale was still looking at the ceiling. "The child," he said. It was not a question either. "We think so, yes." "You think." "She has not confirmed it publicly. The request was filed under diplomatic seal, but the timing and some details in the file." "The braid," Dale said. Carol stopped. "She had a braid," Dale said. "Grass-colored, tight, around her head." Carol opened the file on her tablet and turned it so he could see the official diplomatic portrait of Queen Sova of Vora. The woman in the image was in her mid-50s in human terms, tall and straight-backed in formal Virali state dress, amber eyes steady and composed. Across her forehead, braided tight in the traditional style, was a band of woven fiber the color of dried grass. Dale looked at it for a long time. "Okay," he said. "She is here," Carol said. "She came herself. She's waiting." He turned his head toward the door. And Carol had been doing this job long enough to know when someone needed a minute, and when that minute was not something she should interrupt. So she checked his vitals one more time, confirmed all readings were stable, and quietly moved to the far side of the room. Dale Hurst stared at the ceiling. 52 years. The settlement burning. 3 arrows and a half dose of counteragent, and a child with her fingers wrapped around 2 of his. He did not know what he had expected. On the far side of that door, he had not expected her to become something that required security teams and diplomatic seals and a ship that was not human. He had not expected her to come at all. "Okay," he said again, quietly, to no one in particular, which was the way humans sometimes spoke, when the only available audience was themselves. Then he said, "Let her in." Carol went to the door. Outside, the corridor was very still. The woman who entered did not rush. She crossed the room with the kind of measured pace that Dale had seen in people who had learned to control every signal their body sent, and he recognized it because he had spent years learning the same thing for different reasons. And sometimes you can spot a skill in someone else, even when the context is entirely different. She stopped at the foot of the bed. She was not what he remembered, which was sensible because what he remembered was a 5-year-old with wet amber eyes and a ration bar in her hand. She was straight and composed and wore the formal braid across her forehead, and she looked at him the way people look at something they have kept in a specific place inside them for a very long time. Then she did something that Carol would later describe to her supervisor as the most surprising thing she had ever witnessed in 14 years of suspension recovery. Like Queen Sova of Vora, third-ranked political authority in the Outer Galactic Compact, commander of a fleet of 47 vessels, leader of a civilization of 9 billion people, went to one knee beside his bed. Dale did not move. The room was completely silent. "I did not let go," she said, in clear and careful basic, with an accent that moved through the vowels like water over stone. "Not until they made me." Dale looked at her for a long time. His voice, when he found it, there was still the rough suspension damage kind, and he used it anyway. "I know," he said. She looked up at him. He had no idea what was supposed to happen next. He did not think protocol covered this. He was fairly sure no training manual had a chapter titled, "What to do when the child you took arrows for has become a queen and is kneeling next to your hospital bed." But he had always been better at the next 3 seconds than the next 3 years. "Are you going to stay like that?" he asked. Something moved in her expression. Not a smile exactly. Something older and more complicated than a smile. "Only if you need me to," she said. He thought about that. "I think I am good," Dale said. She stood. Outside the window of Bay 7, the sky over the station was dark and full of stars. And among them, if you knew where to look, you could find the distant light of Vora 4, burning steady in the outer systems, a settlement that had been rebuilt 3 times since the Raiders, a civilization that had survived its consolidation wars and come out the other side with a queen who kept her braids tight and her word tighter. Inside, Carol Briggs quietly noted the time in her log. 14:22, local time. Recovery complete. The station medical board required Dale to spend 5 days in observation before they would release him, which was standard for long-term suspension cases and non-negotiable even for people with diplomatic visitors. Carol enforced this with the same energy she had enforced the 14-hour warm-up sequence. And Sova's security team learned fairly quickly that Carol was not the kind of person who moved on a timeline other than her own. Dale spent the 5 days relearning how to exist. It was not as dramatic as it sounded. His body responded to the recovery protocols well. The physical part was mostly fatigue and recalibration. learning to trust his balance again. No eating food that his stomach had to remember how to process, sitting with the low-grade background ache of muscles that had been in suspension long enough to forget their purpose. None of it was beyond manageable. The rest of it was harder to name. 52 years was not a thing he could feel all at once. It came in pieces. The news feeds, the dates on documents. A call with Pete, who sounded exactly like Pete but slower and warmer, at the edges of him worn smooth by decades that Dale had not been there for. Pete's daughter was 31. Pete had gray hair. Pete laughed at something Dale said, and the laugh was the same, and that was the part that got him in a way he had not anticipated. He watched 3 hours of historical footage on Vora 4. The Consolidation Wars had lasted 11 years. 14 settlements had been lost before the Compact intervened with serious force. In the aftermath, the council government had fractured along old regional lines, and the consolidation had produced Sova as a compromise candidate at 23, and then a crowned queen at 27 after the second referendum. Dale watched footage of her speaking to Vorali crowds. She stood the same way she had stood in Base 7. Straight, still, saying exactly what she meant. He watched footage from a Compact summit 11 years ago where she had argued, successfully, for the expansion of the Protected Species Treaty to cover mid-tier civilizations during infrastructure development phases. 9 billion people. He watched her at a table of 24 planetary representatives, the youngest in the room by a generation, and he watched her not move and not look away from anyone who looked away from her. And he thought about a 5-year-old who had come back for a stranger and stood over him for 20 minutes in a burning settlement. Some things are already in a person at 5. Sova visited Base 7 twice during the 5 days. She did not make the visits official. She came alone, which Carol understood to be a significant deviation from her usual protocol and chose not to comment on. The first visit she stayed for 40 minutes. The second, 2 hours. Dale did not know what he had expected from her in person. She was composed in the way that people who have spent decades in public life become composed, which is not the same as closed. She asked questions directly and listened to the answers completely, and when she spoke, she chose her words the way someone chooses a tool for a specific job. Not randomly, not decoratively, but because it was the right one. She asked him what it had been like going under. He told her, a door from the inside. She was quiet for a moment. She asked him what he wanted to do now. He had been thinking about that. I do not know yet, he said. 52 years is a long gap. Everything I was trained for has probably been updated past what I know. It has, she said, without softening it. The Compact's defense protocols are substantially different now. The rapid deployment model your unit operated under was retired 18 years ago. He appreciated the directness. So, I would have to start over. In certain ways. What ways would I not have to start over? She looked at him with those amber eyes. Some things do not expire, she said. He did not ask her what she meant. He had the strong sense that she would tell him when she was ready to, and not a moment before, and that she was choosing to move at a certain pace for reasons that were hers and not necessarily his to know yet. On the 5th day, Carol cleared him. Sova's diplomatic team had arranged a transport to the Compact reception station, where a formal debrief and resettlement support package were waiting. Standard procedure for long-term suspension cases, modernized and applied. Dale had been offered a private quarters assignment, a service pension, and an advisory consultation with Fleet Command about his prior field experience. He was packing the very small number of things that existed in his name when Sova came to the door. The transport is in 2 hours, she said. I know. She stepped inside. She did not cross to where he was. She stood near the door in that still way she had, and he recognized after a moment that she was choosing her words again. I have a proposal, she said. He set down the bag. When I return to Vora, she said, I will need a senior advisory position filled. The role covers compact relations and tactical assessment. The previous advisor retired 6 months ago. She paused. I am aware that this is unconventional. The position or the offer? Both. Dale looked at her. She looked back, steady and direct. Nothing hidden in her expression, but nothing handed over easily either. You have been running the third largest political entity in the Outer Compact for over 25 years, Dale said. You do not need a tactical advisor who has been out of circulation for 52 and whose entire knowledge base is from before the new protocols. I did not say I needed you for the knowledge base, Sova said. He waited. I need people around me who are not there because of what Vora can give them, she said. I have enough of those. She paused again, the word choosing pause. You took those arrows before you knew my name, before you knew anything about me except that I was small and in the way of something that was going to hit me. Dale was quiet. That is not a common thing, she said. In my experience. He thought about the burning settlement, about Pete shaking his head at the math, me about a door closing from the inside, about the 48 years of notification requests stacked in a file. I would need to get current, he said. Properly current, not a briefing, actual training. I would not take an advisory role I could not do competently. Agreed, she said immediately. And I would need to be able to disagree with you. Something very close to a smile. Yes. Without the diplomatic framework getting in the way. That, she said, here is why I'm asking you specifically. Dale picked up the bag. Okay, he said. She nodded once, the nod of someone who had not been sure of the outcome and was allowing herself exactly 1 moment to register that it went the way she had hoped. Then she moved toward the door, and he followed. And they walked out of Base 7 into the corridor where her security team was waiting. And Carol Briggs watched them go from the door of the room and then went back to her desk and updated his file for the last time. Status: recovered, released. Destination: Vora 4. She closed the file. Outside, the transport was being prepped. The flight to Vora 4 took 11 days, which was fast by older compact routes, but standard on the new corridor infrastructure that the consolidation had funded. Dale spent most of it in the ship's training library, working through the last 3 decades of compact tactical and diplomatic history with the focus of someone who understands that ignorance is not a neutral state. Sova's senior staff left him alone with the library, which he appreciated. On the 4th day, her chief of staff, a Vorali man named Oren, who had the dry precision of someone who had been running logistics for a long time, arrived in the library with a tablet and a very organized packet of current advisory briefings. The Queen thought these might be useful, Oren said. Dale looked at the packet. It was extensive. She briefed you to help me. She told me to give you everything you would need to catch up and then get out of your way. Oren set the tablet down. So, these are the major compact shifts of the last decade. These are the active tension points. These are the 3 council members whose public positions and private positions are significantly different, which you will need to know. He tapped each section as he listed it. And this is a brief history of every decision the Queen has made in the last 10 years that was publicly criticized, with her actual reasoning for each one. Dale looked up. She gave me her reasoning on contested decisions. She said you would need to understand how she thinks to advise her effectively. Oren paused. She also said you would probably disagree with at least 2 of them. Which 2? She did not specify. She said you would find them yourself. Dale looked back at the packet. He found the 2 on the second read. He was not sure yet if she had been right to make those calls or wrong. But he understood why she had made them. And understanding why was more useful than a conclusion. Oren came back the next day to collect the tablet and found Dale 3 sections past where he had left off, with notes written in the margins in a cramped, precise hand that Oren photographed and sent to the Queen without comment. She sent back 2 words, as expected. Oren decided he liked Dale Hurst. On the 8th day, Dale found Sova in the ship's forward observation room after the evening briefing cycle. It was not planned. He had come to look at the stars because 11 days in a training library was 11 days without a window, and he had always found stars clarifying. She was already there. She did not turn when he entered. He came to stand a few meters away, looking at the same view. Vora 4 was not visible yet. They were still in the outer corridor approaches. Oren says you have been through the full packet, she said. Almost. He says you have margin notes. I always have margin notes. She was quiet for a moment. You disagreed with the Kaveth station decision, she said, and the 3rd compact extension vote. Yes. You want to hear why? I read the notes. Dale looked at the stars. I also understood why you made both of them, he said. Even where I think you chose the wrong path, the reasoning was sound, given what you had. But reasoning from incomplete information and reasoning from wrong assumptions are 2 different problems, and you had both on Kaveth. The intelligence that informed that call was compromised, and the people who should have told you it was compromised did not. And you made the best decision you could with bad materials. She turned from the window for the first time. How do you know the intelligence was compromised? Because I spent day 6 cross-referencing the timing of the Kaveth decision against the compact security audit from the same quarter, which is in the secondary library files. One in the source that generated your threat assessment was flagged in that audit 4 months after you voted. Dale paused. Nobody told you? She was very still. Nobody told me, she confirmed. That is the part I would want to address, Dale said. Not the decision itself. The gap between what you were given and what existed. She looked at him for a moment. This, she said, is why I asked you. He did not answer that. There was not really anything useful to add to it. Nor did they stood in the forward observation room for another hour without speaking, which was not uncomfortable, which was the kind of thing you cannot engineer and cannot fake and can only recognize when it is there. On the 11th day, the ship entered Vora 4 orbital approach. Dale stood at the forward window and watched the planet come into view. It was green-gray from orbit, with the wide, shallow oceans Vorali geography produced, and the long, unbroken scar of the northern ridge that made it distinctive in any image. Somewhere below, rebuilt 3 times over, was the settlement where the caches had been, where the burning had been, where a small girl with a grass-colored braid had stood over a stranger for 20 minutes in the middle of a war because she was already at 5 years old. The kind of person who does not leave. Dale had spent 29 years learning to not leave either. They had both learned it in different ways and ended up standing at the same window. Oren came in with the landing briefing and stopped when he saw the two of them at the glass. He had excellent political instincts. He quietly set the briefing on the chair by the door and withdrew without saying anything. The planet grew in the window. The formal reception on Vora 4 was not something Dale had been fully prepared for, because there is a difference between reading about what someone has become and standing in a hall full of 9 billion people's representatives, while that person is announced by a title that takes 45 seconds to recite. Dale stood where Oren had placed him, which was in the senior advisory section, 2 rows back from the dais, and he watched the hall receive Sova the way a hall receives someone it has built into a symbol over decades, which is to say, with the specific formality of people who are trying not to look like they are looking. The formal ceremony lasted 2 hours. Dale stood through it because everyone else was standing, and he was not going to be the one to find a chair. Afterward, in the outer corridor, Oren appeared with a glass of something virali and a look of mild professional sympathy. "You did well," Oren said. "You only shifted weight 4 times. I was counting 6. I was being generous." Dale took the glass. The virali drink was cool and tasted the way very green things taste right after rain. "Does it ever stop being that formal?" Dale asked. "The ceremonial events, no. The actual work, considerably less so." Oren considered. "She runs working meetings differently than you might expect." "How differently?" "She sits on the floor sometimes." Dale looked at him. "For long sessions," Oren said. "She says chairs made by people who design for virali physiology do not account for humans, and she is not going to have an advisor with back problems because of council furniture." Dale was quiet for a moment. "She knew I was coming before the formal offer," he said. It was not a question. "She has been preparing the advisory role for 2 years, Oren said. "Since the last treatment conference confirmed the protocol was nearly ready." 2 years. "She is a planner," Oren said simply. Dale looked down the corridor, where the ceremonial doors had closed and the outer hall was clearing, and the work of the day was already beginning to resume in the side offices and transit corridors of a government that ran on the constant low hum of decisions being made and information being moved. She had built him a place to come back to. He had not known that. He had not known any of it, had been under and cold and absent while she ran wars and votes and crises and built something that lasted. And the whole time there had been a file with 48 years of notification requests stacked in it, polite and formal and waiting. Some things are already in a person at 5. He finished the virali drink. "Where do I start?" he said. Oren produced a second tablet. "The Kaveth intelligence file. She wants your full assessment by the end of the week, including whatever the compromised source connected to and whether it is still active." Dale took the tablet. "And after that?" "The Northern Ridge settlements have been requesting compact recognition as a protected development zone for 6 years, and the council has been routing the request into committee. She wants an outside read on whether the committee delays are procedural or political." "And after that?" Oren looked at him with the expression of someone who has been chief of staff for a long time. "After that," he said. "There is more after that." Dale looked at the tablet. 52 years between one moment and the next. A burning settlement and a grass-colored braid and a door that had closed from the inside and opened again on the far side of a lifetime. 3 arrows and a child who had not let go. The compound outside the Great Hall was full of virali going about the work of a civilization, unhurried and specific, the way people move when they have somewhere real to be. Dale walked toward the advisory offices. He had somewhere real to be. Inside, at a table that was lower than human standard furniture because someone had been planning for this. The work of the outer systems was waiting. He sat down. He opened the file. He began.